All right, are you ready? Thank you for joining me on our first Hangout. This is for USENIX WiAC, the Women in Advanced Computing, is the umbrella under which we're doing this, but we're actually talking about events in general. And are you getting some reverb on that? So anyway, okay. We're talking about how to increase the amount of women who are submitting talks and hopefully the number of women speakers at events and first-time speakers, because events in general, I think, end up having a lot of the same speakers, and they're all great, but it is always good to get new, fresh speakers in also. So I thought first we'd briefly introduce ourselves, and then I will ask some questions that we can all talk about. And my name is Rikki, and I am the community manager for USENIX, and I'm also the managing editor of our bi-monthly publication, Login. Carolyn, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm Carolyn. I work at NIST, and I'm currently the co-chair of the Women in Advanced Computing Summit this year.
Margo?
I'm Margo Seltzer. I'm currently the USENIX board president. I'm on the faculty at Harvard. I also work at Oracle.
Selena?
Hi, I'm Selena Deckelmann. I work for Mozilla, and I participate in a lot of communities, mostly the PostgreSQL community, and I run PyLadies PDX here in Portland, Oregon.
And Amber has been helping me with this whole process. She's an expert on Hangouts.
I'm Amber Graner, and I'm the Lenora community and social media manager. I'm also pretty active in the Ubuntu community.
All right, thank you all for joining today and for your patience on our first Hangout. I wanted to talk about, all of you have been active in, I think Chris is joining us.
He's joining us.
Yep.
Chris, can you hear us? Okay, well, all of you have been active in organizing events or helping organize events and selecting speakers for events. And so I wanted to ask about your experience on getting proposals from women and first-time speakers. How has that worked, and what outreach you might have done? And Selena, I'll start with you, because I know that you said you've had some luck and a lot of it's been related to your network. So would you like to start?
Sure. Yeah, so I've been organizing conferences in an independent way since about 2007. And the main thing that I did right at the beginning, because I didn't really know what I was doing at all, is I just asked all of my friends to give talks. And so probably maybe only a third or a quarter then were women, women that I knew in various open source communities. But over time, that grew quite a bit. And when we ran the first open source bridge, the committee was more than half women, both the organizing and the talk selection committee. And so each one of those women then went into their personal networks. In addition to that, for the year prior to the conference, we didn't really plan it that way, but it ended up working out. We had monthly meetings dedicated to women where the women were able to give talks for the first time to a really supportive, constructive audience. And that ended up creating 4 new speakers in and of itself for our conference. So in the end, we ended up having about 30% of our speakers. I think maybe we had 70 speakers. But anyway, we ended up 30% of those were women in our first year. And that number has held pretty steady. I haven't been involved in Open Source Bridge in about 2 years, so I feel like I was able to kind of set them up for continuing to have that many women involved. One problem that I definitely have encountered is other people have asked me to recommend women to speak at their conferences. And that is a lot trickier. I'm not exactly sure why it's so hard. But when I ask people to speak at my conferences, it tends to be pretty simple for me to convince women to do that. But when I ask them to go out and speak, at conferences that maybe I'm not going to be there, or I haven't been there before, it's not as easy. So I'm really looking for, at this point, ways of making that easier. And some friends of mine started this thing called Speak Up, and it's just speakup.io, and it's under the Python Foundation, auspices of the Python Foundation. And that's been pretty interesting. People come there for mentorship. And then I think the other place where I've found speakers that tend to go out into the greater community is at Ada Camp. And that was a pretty great networking opportunity. I definitely recommend conferences like that, or like She's Geeky, for finding women that are comfortable putting themselves out there in the greater community.
Those are good ideas. I haven't been to Ada Camp yet, but it's definitely on my list of things to do. I want to take a moment to welcome Chris to our group too. Sorry, we had a little technical difficulties here at the beginning, Chris. But if you want to, can you hear me okay?
I did.
Okay.
I can hear
you
fine.
And I'm recording this. I'll post it on our site later and on YouTube. If you just want to briefly introduce yourself, then I know that you really reached out and tried to get women speakers for your upcoming event. And so if you could talk about your efforts to get women and first-time speakers and what worked or what challenges you were having briefly, that would start us off.
So I'm Chris St. Pierre. I work remote. I live in East Tennessee and work for a company in Brooklyn called Wireless Generation. And what Rikki was mentioning was I'm also chairing the upcoming USENIX Configuration Management Summit. And it's the third summit that they've had. And it's something I noticed when I was looking over previous programs was that there had never been a female speaker. It's a one-day event, so there had been maybe in total a dozen speakers. But still, 12 out of 12 is not a great ratio. So I sort of made it a priority to try to get proposals from women, and our program went live yesterday. So I am pretty happy to say that we have infinitely increased the number of female speakers. We have a female speaker this year. So it was great, and it was a high quality proposal. So everything really worked out well for that.
Wait, so when you say infinitely, does that mean it went up by one?
That's a great start,
yes.
though.
Okay.
Yes, it is. It is. And it was a really frustrating process trying to get these trying to get women to trying to find women to propose things. I think Selena was mentioning this just a second ago, but I tweeted about it a bunch, and at one point had a really good ongoing email exchange with a female system administrator who does a lot of speaking and talking in the Microsoft community. She wasn't configuration management specific, so she didn't work out as a speaker for us, but did have a really good exchange for her. At one point, her reaction was, I was expressing frustration with how difficult it is to find female sysadmins willing to speak, and her reaction was basically, ugh, sysadmins. And that really seemed to be the case. There were tons of female developer groups. There's Pi Ladies. There's all these other women developers groups. Women's sysadmin groups. WiAC is basically the closest there is as far as I could find. And so that was just really difficult in that there's no community to reach out to. So the closest thing I ended up finding was there's a Twitter account called Callback Women, and basically they just retweet calls for proposals. And that's just generally women in tech, so it's not specifically sysadmin either. I don't know how we eventually got our single female proposal, because for me it was mostly an exercise in frustration, trying to find female sysadmins to propose these talks. For whatever reason, my experience seems to suggest that even within IT, systems administration is even more heavily male-dominated than...
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And one thing that I've heard from female sysadmins is that they feel very much, they're very privacy conscious. And so when I tell them that they're going to have to get up in front of a room of 100 people and that their name's going to be all over, some conference website and stuff, I've had several women, because I was trying to recruit some women for Puppet Conf. And they were like,
I know
no,
Puppet has
I'm
had
not
a hard
doing
time
that.
in general getting women speakers. And that, talking to Don Foster and then working with Chris, because I tried to help get women to submit proposals for his event also. And then I was recently on the speaker committee for Texas Linux Fest. And so I was having, I was quite frustrated because all of us were trying to get women to submit proposals. And that's what made me think of this topic. And we'll definitely continue it, not just today, this discussion, because I think a lot of events are having this challenge. But I will point out the Women in Advanced Computing group and our summits is not just for sysadmins. It's an umbrella group for women in advanced computing in general. But our LISA group does have a lot of diversity in it, I think, as far as having women also. So we've really reached out to all those groups, and we're still having a problem. So I don't have the answer, but I'm glad we're at least discussing this. Carolyn, would you like to tell us about your experience?
Yeah, WiAC, the Women in Advanced Computing, is actually very successful. We're finding a lot of women who aren't comfortable speaking in a general audience will come to WiAC and speak because it's more of a friendly, supportive atmosphere like Selena was talking about. Lisa, oh my gosh. I was surprised. I was a LISA chair last year trying to find women speakers that were interesting and could do some kind of talk or submit a paper.
You did a lot of outreach.
The number of women who just did not even want to go to a conference, let alone get up and speak. It was amazing, the conversations that I ended up having with these women where they said, well, I went to this conference and had this horrible experience. It may not have been LISA, some conference, and they refused to go to a conference again, let alone get up in front of a bunch of people.
Yeah, I'm sorry that happened. That's terrible because LISA was my first conference that I ever attended, and I had such a great time. I think my very first conference experience definitely set me up for wanting to go to tons of conferences. Probably too many, but yeah, I think that's definitely an issue.
Amber, you've done a lot of outreach also across several communities, and you've also been speaking. Can you tell us about? You have a little different perspective too, being with Lenora, which is a little bit of a unique community. So, can you tell us about your experience?
Sure. My very first conference I went to when I was new to open source was a community Linux Fest. It was the Southeast Linux Fest, and there wasn't a lot of women speakers on that, but Beth Lynn Ecker sort of said, hey, just go give a BOF talk, and from there she created this website, and things just sort of, it was a good foundation for me to start with because it was really encouraging. But then as I started organizing like UbuCons and showing the local teams in the Ubuntu community how to organize those and get speakers, it got to be a little bit more difficult because, again, a lot of women did not want to have their picture taken. They didn't want to have their name plastered all over the internet. And to get them over that, almost the same barriers that people have when they enter open source, which is like the open and transparent part of it, knowing that an email is going to be on the internet, their comments are going to live in IRC in perpetuity or whatever. That same fear of doing that was the same fear or aversion to speaking out too. Now on the Lenora side, because we are kind of niche, we're in the ARM space, we're Linux on ARM, so it's really difficult to find women in that ARM space, because I even have a hard time, even at our events, to say, hey, you want to be in the picture, or do you want to lead a session, or do you want to do something like that? And it's really hard to find those. And when we're looking at keynote speakers, to find a keynote speaker that's they're diverse enough to speak to the whole entire ecosystem of ARM and not be so niche, depending on whether it's an enterprise group, whether it's a networking group, or whether it's virtualization, all these new areas in ARM, it's really difficult to find that. So and again, we're tackling that problem as well as we plan. We have 3 connects a year, and as we start looking at that, we're having a hard time finding that audience or finding those type of speakers as well. So maybe this ongoing conversation, we can come up with solutions on how to do that and where these resources are at. But it's so much easier in the broader distribution community to get female speakers than it is in the niche areas. So that's been at least my experience so far.
Margo, what about you? You have experience with a variety of events, I think, and so what's been your experience on getting women to participate and speak, and first-time speakers?
So I think we need to step back for a minute and frame the question whether, what's a reasonable expectation? If women only comprise 10% of an entire community, then it's not going to be easy to get more than 1 in 10 speakers to be women. So one of the first things I think we need to do is understand what's the ratio in these communities. So in academia, and I think in development in general, we're still seeing women's penetration only at around 20%. So I think it's important that we set expectations appropriately. So
well, I think that that's true in the U.S., but if you go to places like China or India, that percentage is more. It's far closer to 50%
I think
in proprietary software.
I think that's true, but I think we're talking about events that we're holding here domestically, and so getting people from other countries to come, I think, is going to be even more significant challenge. So at least from USENIX's perspective, we're talking about conferences where people actually show up in person, and the vast majority of those people are in fact U.S. centric. So if you look at the academic conferences, the proportion of women in those communities varies dramatically across the areas. For some reason, our networking system and design conference is the worst, where we see, and I'm talking total number of attendees, forget about speakers, is on the order of 5%. In some of the other conferences, we see women comprise up to maybe 20%. So in the academic venues, I think the speaker issue is much trickier because there's a number of hurdles that you need to overcome before you actually get to be a speaker, right? You have to write a paper, then you have to have the paper accepted, and then you have to be the lead author on the paper. So it would be interesting to actually dig into the data and see how far off we are in the various in those various steps, given the proportion of women in the field. So that's the first observation. The second is that even in those communities where the process is sort of very prescribed as to how one becomes a speaker, the issue of speaking up is fundamentally different from that of being a speaker. So I had a shocking realization. We had a little WiAC meeting at NSDI, which is USENIX's Network System Design and Implementation Conference, and we had about 5 students, we had about 5 veterans, we had some USENIX folks there, and we talked about just getting up at the microphone and asking questions. And I was shocked when one of my colleagues, who I think of as a peer and is about the same seniority level, said, well, actually, you're the only woman I ever see getting up at the mic and asking questions. And that's actually an area where I think we can help, and we can start creating an atmosphere where, it's okay, it's okay to ask questions, you should ask questions, here's how to ask questions. And if we have any of these kind of events, before a conference, helping people feel comfortable there, it would be really valuable to actually talk through the program, hone in on a couple of papers where people are interested, and actually seed the group with questions that people then feel comfortable going up and asking. So
That's a really, really good idea.
So I think there are concrete steps we can take that are way, way, way before getting a woman up there in front of the mic, because it only takes a couple times of asking questions and having people realize that you ask good questions to develop that confidence to say, yeah, I can talk to this community.
Oh, we've done that in the past with panel discussions. We're not sure what the audience is going to ask, so we have talked to people in the audience and really developed the takeaway message from the panel and asked people to actually ask those questions so that it does build up that confidence. And that's a system that works really well if you get enough people to be involved in it and agree to be involved in it, especially women in the audience.
Another thing that I found in these conferences is that the number of women who attend increase proportionally to the number of women that are speaking.
It's kind of a chicken and egg thing.
Yeah, and so even though women are a very tiny minority, the women who are involved in these communities tend to be amazing. They tend to have a lot to talk about, even though there's so few of us. So, I think that I don't ever feel bad about bumping up the percentage of women speakers, because most of them, they've had to fight so hard to even be in this industry that they tend to have great things to talk about. So I'm really a proponent of just getting a huge number of women to submit proposals because they tend to be incredibly high quality. And, for Open Source Bridge, we just removed the names and did blind voting on the talks. And consistently, the women's talks were accepted at a higher percentage than the men's. So, and that was without anybody knowing, any gender.
Well, that would be an interesting research study, I guess, on why that works. Carolyn wanted to say something.
That study's been done a billion times, and blind review is absolutely the way to go. Without blind review, people rate men's proposals higher, period.
They do. It's so
Even
annoying.
No, it's
Yes.
not just US, it is universal across disciplines. In a number of studies, we don't need to redo that study. Blind review is the way to go.
Okay, Carolyn, I think you had something you wanted to add also.
Yeah, there's another issue when I was talking to women who could be presenters, whether it was for WiAC or for Lisa or something else. Some of them actually don't want to be presenters, even though they may have a really good message and may be great speakers, because they don't want to become the representative for the gender. And they feel like, why do I have to get up and represent all women? I don't want to do that. I don't know how to get over that.
That's something that I was certainly concerned about as well. You know, I think my experience mirrors what Selena was talking about. But on the other hand, you know, especially as a guy trying to do this sort of advocacy, I don't want to appropriate women's voices and force them into that position of being constant advocates. You know, I'm worried about advocacy fatigue or whatever. Wouldn't it be awful nice for women to be able to go to a conference once and be IT people instead of IT women? And that's always a concern that I've got being a guy in this space. So.
That's absolutely right. I mean, the problem is that the women who get known to be good speakers get asked to do everything. And this issue of wouldn't it be great to go to a conference and just be an attendee is so true. The one thing I enjoyed the most about Grace Hopper was that I was anonymous. Right? When I show up at one of my conferences, I am not anonymous for a number of reasons, but mostly because there are only a few of us who share the same chromosomes. But, you know, at a conference where there were 2,000 women, it was like, cool, I'm like just one of the gang here. This is really nice. So getting those numbers of attendees up where the women no longer feel like, everybody knows who I am. I can't remember all these people's names. You know, just get me out of here. Really, really nice.
I agree with what you're saying, where you don't want to force women to speak just so that we have more women speakers. But that's why I'm also talking about just getting first-time speakers in general. I had this in publishing for quite a few years, where I had to go out and ask experts, people in IT who weren't writers necessarily, to submit proposals. They didn't know that they were qualified to write an article. Or I'm seeing that with speaking. People don't know that they could be speaking at these events. They think that they aren't the experts, even though they are in whatever it is that they're doing. And then the other thing they need to see is what it can do career-wise for them. You know, it's not about helping other women or helping the community. It's helping yourself.
Yes.
I don't like to speak in public, and some people have been trying to get me to do this Hangout for a really long time, and it took me a while to do it, even though I know I needed to do this kind of thing. And that's, I think, the message that will be helpful for us to convey is, why do you want to do this? It's not about helping everyone else. Ultimately, it's about helping yourself. You know, is it getting over your fear of speaking? Is it helping you network? Is it helping you attend an event that you otherwise couldn't have afforded to go to because you get in free because you are speaking? Or is it, going to look good on your resume, or whatever it is? For me, for example, had I not started speaking, I don't know that I would have ultimately become a community manager. I would have stayed behind the scenes as an editor probably. And I didn't know that this was something I was going to like to do back then when I spoke at my first event.
Yeah, I think that's so huge. The career opportunities that women are missing out on by not speaking, I think, are huge, particularly in open source, where so much of advancement and so much of the opportunities that you get access to are based on your reputation. And the men in open source have been building their reputations worldwide, not just in the United States. I mean, they travel to these amazing conferences outside the United States and are incredibly well known in these other places. And it has completely solidified all the opportunities that they have, consulting opportunities to go to other conferences for free, and just everything that you just described. And it's so important for women who are interested in open source to participate in that ecosystem, because it's like it's there and it's real, and it definitely has a huge impact on your career.
I'm going to have to go and wrap it up. Carolyn went ahead and dropped out because I did tell her we would try to keep it at 30 minutes. This is a huge topic, though, and I'd like to have some follow-up discussions on it. And I'd like to do some of them live on air. So what I will do is I will go ahead and post this video on our website along with some of our thoughts, and then put a call out for other people to participate and follow up. And hopefully maybe we can do this within the next week or so. I'll organize it and be in touch with everyone and see if we can come up with a time that works for everybody. Also, I would like to say that we do have a lot of calls for papers on our website right now. In particular, the LISA event, the CFP closes April 30th. So if you have any questions about submitting proposals, you can email me at rikki@usenix.org, and I will post that on our website also. So I'd like to thank everybody for participating, and I will be in touch soon so we can hopefully follow up on this topic. Thanks a bunch.
Wonderful.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rikki.
Bye.
Bye.